Okay. Cut the mic, cut the music, let's get going. Hello everybody, thank you, thank you. You know, as the last panel of the event, maybe just start by saying thank you everybody for coming to another InfraGardens. This is InfraGardens number 8. We've done these kind of around the world now in the coolest cities, so really a pleasure for everybody to come together. And we love these intimate settings where we can kind of get deep, open up the conversation and dive in. So the goal of this panel is to really dive into DeFi, investing infra. And for me, one of the core themes of the week have been kind of reflecting on the unfolding, kind of the events that we've seen in DeFi over the last couple weeks. And one of the core themes has been analyzing the different layers of risk within the DeFi stack. So as you look at the DeFi stack, you look at oracles, RPCs, sequencers, you look at the underlying security of the blockchain network that a protocol is deployed on. And so the goal is to really take a step back, bring the experts in that we have today on the panel, and dive into each of these, understand if it's possible to create a common framework for analyzing this risk, and to dive into, as I like to call it, kind of like the intra-dependencies that each of these layers of the stack have on each other. So maybe, if you guys don't mind, let's just start off with a quick round of introductions. Maybe a bit about, of course, your name and what you're focusing on at your respective projects.
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So, hey everyone, thanks for having me here. My name is Nikhil Suri. I'm head of product and engineering at the Wormhole Foundation. And just a quick one-liner about Wormhole. Wormhole is one of the largest interoperability protocols in the space. We're connected to over 40 chains. We've processed over $70 billion in volume and continuing to grow and support lots of different protocols and lots of different chains and lots of different retail use cases today. So yeah, excited to be here.
Great. Hi, my name is Jan Barsny. I am a co-founder and technical lead at Zircuit. Zircuit's a zero-knowledge rollup on Ethereum with built-in sequencer-level security, so we want no DeFi exploits or any hacks on our network. But we also just launched a DeFi protocol, or just announced it last week or last couple of days, so check that out. We'll be excited too.
Hey, I'm Philip Sandmer. I'm the founder and CEO of Li.Fi. We are a meta aggregation and routing layer. As such, we are powering the biggest wallets in the space, from Robinhood to MetaMask, Phantom, doing around $8 billion a month in transaction volume. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Martin. I'm co-founder of Morpho. Morpho is a universal lending network, so basically empowering any builder to build an earn borrow product with close to more than 10 billions of total deposits. And yeah, let's do it.
Excellent, thank you guys. And I guess on behalf of myself, I'm Dylan, part of the BD team here at DIA. So let's dive in, and I want to just get straight into it. Actually, deep dive into, as mentioned, kind of analyzing the different risk levers and risk layers that we have in DeFi. If you take a look at it, oracles, right? Oracles have their own independent set of risks. So do RPCs, so do bridges, etc. And I'd love to kick it off with getting your guys' takes on: is it possible to create one common framework through which we can kind of like analyze all of these risks in one comprehensive point, right? Create a standard, maybe a risk rating, combine and consolidate all of this, or does the natural uniqueness of each of these independent factors require the risk to be measured independently? And feel free to take it as you will.
I can start. Yeah, I think theoretically, is it possible? Yes, probably. Like other things in math, but I was actually talking to someone about this yesterday, and they mentioned that they think that evaluating risk in DeFi is an NP hard problem. There's just so many different inputs. There's so many different ways that protocols can interact together, even if you do audits, even if you do formal verification, even if you do fuzzing, even if you take all the steps, you have defense and depth measures. There's so many ways that someone can end up using your protocol in a way that you never even envisioned it being able to be used. And so I think theoretically, yes, like you could do it, but I think practically speaking, it's a very, very difficult problem, and we can probably only get to approximations, and we'll just have to live with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the risk is multidimensional. And trying to condense this information into one dimension, of course, you lose all the other information, but maybe that gives you a glimpse on what's the overall risk that you take. And as a retail user, for instance, maybe if you are searching to deposit into a specific protocol or a vault in the case of Morpho, there is a very low risk vault and very high risk vault, and maybe the rating can give you a sense of, okay, this looks cool, like 15% of USDC, but it's a D. And you have like a 5% and it's a A, and then maybe it can give you at least some information. Or, okay, I'm rather like risk averse person, so maybe I should take the A versus the B, the D. So this is very useful. Very useful for people, but saying that it will solve every problem and you're losing information. And I think there's something that we need to mention, and there's no risk-free lunch. And I think this is something that sometimes will advertise too much in the DeFi space, where you have no risk-free rate. In DeFi, it does not exist. Like if you're earning yield, this is because you're taking risk, and you're rewarded for that, and that's it.
Yeah, I would also agree. It's a way too hard problem. We might be able to start with very broad categories and then define frameworks per category and vertical. So what I'm saying is, okay, there's economic risk, there's business risk, like continuity risk, for example, then technical security, and trust assumptions and all of these things, and then break it down per vertical, lending markets, interoperability, and again, and so on. Like, yeah, that would be like a huge task, though. And we have been chatting with some risk protocols, especially around the insurance space. It's obviously their job to assess risks across the board, and we have seen them struggling a lot to find like a unified concept and therefore like a scalable business model, and thereby insurance would be such a great relief. And I think, for example, Aave with their $1 million insurance is a great example of going something. But I foresee insurance to come out of individual protocols rather than like a broadly applied risk framework that's been pushed on the space in the classical sense.
So I think there are other people providing insurance in the space. I know because we use them for people who deploy on Zircuit, as well as our finance product. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. But I think to get back to the original topic, I think a single scorer, I don't know how useful that would mean. Like if a DeFi protocol or a token, or I don't even know what you'd be rating, is an 87 out of 100 versus an 86. Like what does that mean? I don't think that's very clear. Even if that's like a 76 versus an 86 on security, that's still like a weird number, because maybe the baseline is really, really bad. But breaking it down into these categories in this framework that would be fine-grained and across multiple verticals would make a lot of sense. But then maintaining that list and applying it honestly is very, very difficult. If we look at things like L2Beat in the space, which is trying to do this for L2s, they're pretty good, but sometimes they're a little behind. Sometimes they get things wrong, they're human. And DeFi is, I think, much, much bigger. There's like 130 rollups. I don't know how many pools there are. But then if you start to rate all of those, unless you can automate that, that's very, very difficult. And even then, I don't think users would understand. Like if you say, oh, I have a trust assumption this, I don't think some users will understand what that really, really means.
Yeah, I kind of agree with, again, what's been said here, but I have maybe a more controversial take as well, which is that I don't think that risk ratings are that useful. And I don't think it's that useful for the industry to spend so much time on risk ratings. I mean, I was also talking to someone yesterday about this, and I think the balancer pool that was exploited was rated as like a B+. It's like completely non-representative of the risk that was actually present in that pool. And so I think that probably a much more useful thing, and one thing that we have found much more useful to do at Wormhole, rather than talking about like risk assessment frameworks, is actually putting defense in depth mechanisms in place. And I think that putting protections in place and putting multiple layers of defense in place if you're building any kind of on-chain protocol, so that there are protections that will kick in based on certain thresholds or based on different kind of scenarios, is a much more valuable way to spend time and invest resources than in trying to define some kind of arbitrary risk framework.
That's sort of complementary though, right? Like you as a DeFi builder will do defense in depth because you're supposed to, and your reputation and your users' funds are on the line. But someone else can still come and rate your response to that, right? They could say your defense in depth was actually not as deep as you thought, and you can do better here, or it was actually looks pretty good in this top tier. So I think, I agree that I don't think the ratings are too useful, except that sometimes they might poke you to do a better job, or me to do a better job, like I'm not singling out your project. I think we have a large group of resources in the space, and we can do both.
I just want to say that B plus do default. Like it's not because it's like plus or whatever that there's no default. So maybe in the case of Balancer it was not the right grade, and I don't know who was the rating agency and what's their legitimate if they are legitimate. But again, this is what I'm saying, that even AA or whatever can default. It's just the probability is very, very low. But we should not say that, oh, it's A, so that never default.
Yeah, it's just really to maybe educate those who don't know what happened. But the balancer pool that got hacked was a very old version, had been audited for like 15 times. So it was considered very safe and secure. And then they released a new version, V3 pools. And within the V3 pools, they changed the dynamics and everything. And they pointed something out in their code documentation. Hey, we did this because there's rounding to prevent a certain rounding error. So, and that rounding error was obviously present in the old version. So hackers saw what has been documented in the new version, it's been 4 or 5 years old, audited over and over again. But that rounding error could then be used to exploit the protocol, like in a very finesse way. And obviously, yeah, V2 pools were deployed everywhere. So this is what happened. So yeah, it just was it was crazy to find this. And it's just so hard to protect ourselves from attacks like that.
I think we touched
legacy. So one thing to add here, and that's probably new about this space, right? Legacy in the traditional context in Web 2 space, for example, in the normal internet space, it's all on centralized servers, so legacy only exists right there. But legacy in crypto is permanent and it's public. so tech debt gets a totally new meaning in this context.
Yeah, we touched on a lot of the topics there. We touched on risk ratings, right? If these are applicable. We touched on insurance. I definitely want to come back to that. And one of the things that you mentioned, Nikhil, is redundancy, kind of like failover modules, and the importance of that. I think that's definitely a really, really important thing. What I wanted to look at a little bit deeper into are like these intra-dependencies that I think are not as spoken about or not as well understood to the average investor, or even the institutional capital allocators, really, and where institutional capital is. If you look at oracles, right, you could, for example, analyze the robustness of a given oracle architecture, but nonetheless, you have to consider that oracles are still reading and writing data depending on the RPCs that they're leveraging. And Nikhil, I actually wanted to ask you this question specifically. It's a unique kind of example here. It's like, should an asset that has been bridged, right, and then supplied on a lending protocol, should that have a higher risk profile than an asset that sits natively on the blockchain network on which it's being supplied? Are these types of risk profiles actually priced in and considered where we currently sit? From the bridging perspective, maybe you could give us some perspective as to the high level risk profile in that kind of context.
Yeah, I mean, I would be very, very curious to hear Morpho's thoughts on something like this as
I
well.
can start if you want. I can start it. I have a great example. For instance, CBETH, which is native on Ethereum. You can scale well bull market against CBETH on Ethereum. The reason why is there's a lot of DEX liquidity, and DEX liquidity is super important to perform liquidation in period of stress, like now. and so you can have like a huge market and still have like liquidity in periods of stress. If you look at on Base, I think CBETH is trading at a discount, and there's not that much liquidity on the DEX. So if you want to create the same size of market than on Ethereum, you can't, just because it's too risky. So if someone wants to, like Coinbase was willing to create and like increase the market share of, this market, they will need to increase the DEX liquidity as well. So you can't apply the same risk rating or whatever is the metric that we choose. It's the same asset in theory. In practice, it's not. So you need to have like maybe some caps on the supply side on Base that are way lower than on Ethereum, and that must be taken into account. Not even talking about the bridge and the risk, etc. That maybe you can talk about.
Yeah, I think, I agree as well. Like, practically, the assets, when you bridge an asset, right, it's just priced the same way. That the price doesn't change, and if the price was different, someone could just arb the price difference, because there's, like, when you bridge something, there is inherent risk in bridging. There is inherent risk in going to a new chain. You might be bridging from Ethereum, an asset from Ethereum, to like a shit chain, and the shit chain could get hacked, right? So it's inherently more risky on the shit chain, but that price is never represented and would just be arbed out if it was represented. Same thing on the way back, right? So I think that's why practically, like theoretically, yes, they should have different prices, but practically they don't, because when you move an asset through DeFi, that doesn't really like get represented.
I want to add to this that this risk of multi-chain native assets as being issued by Wormhole, Layer 0, Axelar, Hyperlane, Chainlink, with their standards like OFTs, entities, ITS, CCTs, whatever. This risk is being recognized by this space, and there is a standard called XERC20 which tries to avoid multi-chain asset with vendor logins. So essentially you can change the underlying messaging protocol, and the ability for each bridge to mint and burn this asset is rate limited, like we know it from APIs. And but yeah, unfortunately, this asset standard hasn't found much adoption yet. It's mostly driven by Hyperlane actually. But unfortunately, yeah, it's not happening at the same time, because there is no economic incentive behind it, right? Like Layer 0 has a strong incentive to push OFTs, Wormhole, strong incentive to push entities.
not to get too spicy into the interop wars here, but for what it's worth, Wormhole NTT has the exact same feature and has rate limiting at the top level and allows you to configure multiple verifiers for asset transfers. In fact, Layer 0 OFT has the same exact feature as well. You can configure multiple verifiers and configure rate limits as well at the top level. So, XRC20 was great, but I think not only, it's also kind of not needed anymore, because a lot of the new asset standards like have these defense in depth protections in there, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Is we've invested in, and I think a lot of bridges have invested in, defense in depth measures where, if let's say, Wormhole was exploited or another bridge, Layer 0 was exploited or something like that, then there are multiple layers that an attacker would have to break.
I unfortunately have to disagree here. I'm very sorry. So Li.Fi is a neutral party. We're neutral to all the bridging providers. But of course, you can replicate these security mechanisms, but at the same time, you still have a vendor lock-in, and with that, a vendor like a business risk. So if Wormhole falls out, for whatever reason, might be a hack, might be whatever, right? Like, people, they are in need of issuing and burning this asset, they are tied to your technology, and it can fail in so many ways. So there is this vendor lock-in, and this vendor lock-in is an inherent risk you cannot avoid, essentially, except you would completely open source and decentralize everything, every single part, and that is not in your interest. So in that context, or in that regard, we could argue ERC20 still has a meaning and has a purpose. But yeah, I also totally understand why it's not happening. There is no economic incentive from no one to actually opt into that standard, and all the forces that have been trying to were not strong enough. Yeah, and I want to emphasize that Wormhole is doing a great job, and we know US standards very well. when integrating all issued entities, and you're doing a great job on the security side, just from a theoretical standpoint, and that's what we are talking about. There is a vendor login, that's risk, vendor risk, and it is avoidable with different kinds of standards.
Yeah, just to close this out. Not to get too spicy, but I actually disagree that there is vendor lock-in. Even with something like OFT, I think there is no vendor lock-in. Why do I think that? Because all the contracts are open source. If Wormhole were to disappear tomorrow, and you have an asset issuer that's on NTT, let's say, the contracts are open source, they're audited, they're working. Let's say Wormhole stops working. You just replace Wormhole as your verifier with another verifier. You could have layer 0 as a verifier while using the NTT token transfer standard. And so in that sense, I think there is actually truly no lock-in. Of course there is. I won't deny that we, from a business perspective, have an interest in many asset issuers and are excited about many asset issuers using our specific implementation that we've built. But from a vendor lock-in perspective, if Wormhole were to disappear tomorrow, or even with layer 0, if OFT, or if with layer 0, if you're using OFT and layer 0 were to disappear tomorrow, then you can keep using these contracts.
But I mean, that in theory is right, but then in reality, it's like with layer 0, right? You can choose your verification mechanism, your DVN, and then but then in practice, companies are going the convenient way. So unless you go the extra mile to enforce independence, which is not in your interest, this is often not happening. So there are just different ways these companies are tied to a certain vendor, and there is just more dependency than there would be if it's just the native blockchain's asset. So there is this additional risk unless you would really push for independence from your business, which again is not happening. So we need to talk about the worst case, which is like a huge liquidation event, right? And we have seen big ass liquidations this year. Hard, painful. But let's say all of this would happen in combination with like an attack on a bridge, or like a bridge goes down for whatever reason, like anything, and let's say that I would even assume in 5 years from now, the majority of assets are being natively issued multi-chain, on entities, on OFTs, on CCTs. We see this happening, we see the adoption, we have all the data on this, right? So that is the future for many, many projects. We're going to launch multi-chain, even though we are not multi-chain yet, but we're going to launch it multi-chain out of the gate. And actually that's great, I think that's the future, it should be like that. But it adds this risk factor. And if we then have like huge liquidations in combination with something, and hackers are getting really good at combining things, and it's always can just be, doesn't even have to be a hacker, can just be MEV, can just be a searcher, like a smartphone.
Yeah, I guess catch us on Twitter to finish this this back and forth. But I guess to close out the discussion, like the original question, yeah, I agree though that there is inherent risk in bridging and just generally moving in DeFi, and that's just not represented practically speaking.
Thank you.
So we like spicy panels anyway. This is the whole idea behind panels. And I want to take a quick second to zoom back out, and kind of one of the topics we touched on quickly and jumped over was insurance, the idea of insurance. I need to dive deeper into the whole insurance topic. So maybe I can cue you guys as industry experts yourselves to share some insights on this. It's my impression that in order to bring institutional trust and therefore institutional capital and just capital and trust behind your average investor on chain, ideally everything should be underwritten by and have insurance options. The pushback I get when I say this is that nobody wants to underwrite all that insurance, or nobody wants to underwrite all that risk. Let's maybe hear from Zircuit first, as you guys are institutional focused natively as a blockchain network, and much of that is actually a focus on backing or insuring those vaults, right? So we'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, I think insurance is definitely a key part of our go-to-market there, and I think there's a world of people who will always agree with you and say, no, I don't want to back this because it's risky and smart contracts are very scary. But I think they're missing out on a big opportunity because most of the time DeFi is actually pretty good. So I think they're losing a lot of money by not insuring this and collecting these premiums. But I'm not actually providing the insurance myself. We're working with a partner to do it. So maybe that's not an opinion that is too relevant. Nonetheless, if you can get this insurance on-chain, if you can get people to realize that actually their funds are secure in a way that they really understand, because most people really understand insurance, but they don't understand a smart contract hack or they don't understand risk in DeFi, you can bring on a whole bunch of new people. And I think that's the most exciting part of it. And that makes all the logistical nightmare of trying to get that to work worth it. And we're fortunate we have some partners that do that, so we didn't actually have that logistical nightmare. But it's really something I think that's been undervalued in this space. And I think it's easiest to do in a traditional setting of B2B and talk with an insurance provider and get some good underwritten policies. But I'm also surprised we haven't seen as a sort of Web3 native, a more Web3 native solution really come forward and play into it. I am excited that people like Aave are also trying to look into insurance for this. I think it'll de-risk a lot of DeFi for a lot of people who are very risk averse.
I have an anecdote regarding insurance. So we used to work with InsurRace to insure bridging transactions on Jumper.exchange. It's pretty huge. That's $2 billion a month in transaction volume alone. And we had it running for almost a year. And we're trying to see if people were willing to pay for an additional insurance. And that was at a time where bridge hacks were the norm. So no one used it. It was like bridges got hacked on a quarterly basis. It was like 3 years ago. And still, despite that, there was zero willingness to pay. It was not even expensive. It was really like pay 30 cents to insure your $10,000 transaction. Nope. Zero usage. So at some point we removed it to keep the interface cleaner and simpler. Just interesting. So the space is very risk friendly, the DeFi native space. And then the retail user on the neobank side again doesn't care because it's so far away from him or her, right? So
I don't think that insurance is a blocker for institutions. I think it would be more the opposite. Like institutions are going on chain, and first first blocker is about how do we build on chain? It's just like how do we do that? And once it's built, like we want to grow it, and how do we get insured? And then if you have a BlackRock that asks the insurance provider or whatever institution that say, hey, we want to get insured, then insurance that are like that don't want to underwrite any risk, like they will think twice when their favorite clients ask them to insure the whatever the strategy or thing that they do on chain, and then we'll get more classic insurance actually looking into that space. But I think it would be more that way than insurance, classic insurance, like ready to underwrite DeFi risk that will enable the like institution use case. Institutions are already coming on chain.
Yeah, and I was about to say it's not up to like a Wormhole to price in any risk. I think it's up to the funds, to the institutions to price that in their risk profile. They price it in whatever their expected returns are. It's just like another risk. You just add it to it. You can do the simple math on hacks. And luckily, I mean, I think we have seen hacks going down, especially in the interoperability space. Not only developers have learned a lot, but also auditors have seen so many attack vectors by now that we saw the large bridge hack recently, but it was Garden. Garden was the last bridge hack we saw. I think it was the first in over a year. So making progress.
For sake of time, I want to try to bring it back together, but I do think that begs something pretty interesting that I wanted to touch on, which is like at the end of the day, who is pretty much responsible for being for analyzing this risk, right? You see in DeFi we have a lot of like self-attested security claims. I think that's very common, and I'd love to also cue Morpho on this because you guys take such an interesting like permissionless composable model, right? Where you're working so closely with curators and like I think it's very fascinating to dive into like where does the responsibility lie for risk analysis? Is it the provider who's essentially packaging this up and providing this to the consumer, or do we depend on these self-attested security claims that an infra provider might make? Where does the responsibility lie?
Yeah, that's a complicated question to answer. I think there's layers of responsibility. For instance, Morpho smart contract, we make sure that we do all the audits, all the formal verifications, and we on our side, we are really focused on that primitive layer, that infrastructure, and make sure that like for the use case that we planned, it's super safe. And usually we have a very minimalistic approach. Any feature that is like just nice to have is like for us to drop. And what we see in the space is most protocols are trying to put everything in the protocol, like a variable, stable rate, E-mode, whatever, and you end up with like thousands of lines of code, and each line of code that someone writes is just basically like a new attack surface. And I think that we should see smart contract more as hardware. It's not software. Software is basically like, oh, you do the whole thing modular. You add the features as your clients and users ask, etc. It's not like that. It's more, if Tesla was to recall all their cars today, they would go bankrupt. That's it. But if they have like, they want to enable the weather application in the software of the machine, then they can do this. It's like the difference between software and hardware. And we are in the business of hardware. And then you have the vault, the curator, etc., which each layer has its component. Would say that a large integrator that wants to integrate Morpho, they should do their own risk analysis of the smart contracts, etc. But obviously, not everyone has the team inside internally. I don't know if it's me. But in each layer will need to do their risk assessment. On our side, Web3 SOC is, for instance, sort of like a security certification. There's others that can give a glimpse about the security of the protocol layer. There's the risk rating for maybe a vault or the market in which a vault is depositing. That could be another way to assess risk. But obviously, like all those actors have like a different and segregated responsibility. And as an actor, you can't check everything. That's not possible, and it's just like not viable. I'm sorry.
The metal.
Oh, wow.
Sorry. Yeah. Good learning. I wanted to add to this. Many companies are also outsourcing this to middleware providers. For example, on the is an asset secure or not, there is like Go Plus Security, which simply does nothing else than asset assessments and assessing if an asset is secure or not. Many enterprise companies have been using us, so we have been positioning us early on as a company that assesses the risk on bridging. With it, we developed a framework with Consensus. Then another one, because obviously Consensus and us have a certain bias in general, just being businesses. We also developed another risk framework with L2Beat, and many of our enterprise clients have been relying on that, where we really go the extra mile. We even talk to the auditing companies behind these bridges, because just because you got audited doesn't mean you have implemented all the things, right? All the findings. So we go the extra mile and see like how has the collaboration been with this specific player and so on. So what I'm saying is like middleware providers can also serve as an additional risk measure, and there are plenty of them out there in the space in different categories.
So I think to answer the original question of should people self-attest to security, I think they should, but I don't think they should be the only ones doing it. I think people will lie or they'll massage numbers if they can get away with it. That's shady. I'm not encouraging this, but trying to get organizations to self-regulate is very, very challenging. That's one reason why governments have this responsibility. And we don't have a government in Web3, so we don't have that liberty. But there are other ways you can add security, whether that's independent frameworks that we've already talked about, whether you want to use Zircuit where we add layer, even if you don't get an audit, we can still protect you. Whether you want to, ask your friends for some reputation or something less formal, I think self-attestation will not be the only way to verify something as secure.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points made here. I think I totally agree with the, excuse me, I totally agree with the point about smart contracts being like hardware and not like software. I think that's absolutely how we approach it as well. I mean, even if you think about the integration journey or the migration process, if you release a new version of your smart contracts, I mean, it's very much like hardware. The development process is like hardware. You get it audited, you have to implement it, you have to plan out on a long time frame. But there are software-like components in smart contracts, which are like the software components. You have an admin wallet, or you have like a configurable parameter. You have parameters you can adjust for risk. And so it's important to, I guess, recognize that there's a difference there in the relationship between those. And yeah, I think that's why on the hardware side, it's really important to do all the right things, get audits, get formal verification, fuzzing, all the security reviews. But then on the more software side of smart contracts, it's really important to have defense in depth mechanisms. You need to have active protections that can kick in, whether they are centralized or whether they are decentralized. You need to have some kind of protection that will kick in the case of an active exploit, because you can't control all the softer parts of your protocol. I was going to make another point, which is more in regards to your original question, which was who should do the rating. I agree. I think companies should also self-attest. There's also no way to stop companies from self-attesting. They're always going to self-attest, whether or not it's true or false. I think it would be great. I know I made a point about risk assessment frameworks not being too valuable before, but I do think that your response was accurate. That some kind of committee, some kind of review does push us to be better, and I think it's really valuable to have some kind of like independent third party, made up of people who are, maybe if it's bridging, people who are not part of a bridging team, or if it's borrow lend, people who are not part of a borrow lend team that's being evaluated. Some kind of independent third party review process. Like, I mean, there was one that was followed. I think there was this decision of Uniswap governance a few years ago, and there was this Uniswap bridge assessment committee. Plug for Wormhole. Wormhole was rated as the highest, but it was, for what it's worth, regardless of the rating, an independent community or an independent committee of researchers who spent like 3 months doing this really open, transparent process around how they evaluated which bridge was the best. That was like 3 years ago, but I don't think I've seen a similar process like that in the past few years, or at least I've heard of a great process like that.
This wasn't it also then that still A16Z as a major shareholder just overvoted?
Well, Wormhole did win the governance vote, but yes, A16Z did have a lot of sway in or power in that vote in favor of Layer 0.
Exactly.
Good times. But my point is just that I think that it would be great to see more independent third-party assessment committees that do deep research and produce assessments in a transparent and open process, as opposed to getting some rating that you don't know how it got produced.
I want to add to this just from an enterprise experience. So we provide the frameworks, and we use the frameworks to educate our clients or help them how to look at things. All the big ones, from a Phantom to a MetaMask to a Ledger, Robinhood, they have their security teams, and they do their own assessment on top of that, always. For any new bridge that comes in, so with Li.Fi in general, we provide a bunch of providers. We give a recommendation based on who's the end user, like institutional, like what's the expected user experience, and you can allow and deny any individual solution. And to give an example, like right now there is a bridge that grows very fast, but it's fully centralized, and that bridge has not been activated by many of our enterprise clients because they say, no, I'm not going to take this risk. So this is interesting to see, and it's a good sign, I think.
Well, thank you guys. We've kind of run over a little bit, and I appreciate you guys for all staying on. Hopefully this is interesting enough to stay in the room over. But let's just summarize it and kind of take a step back and close up here. Really keen to get each of your kind of summarized thoughts on state of the DeFi industry after the events of the last 2 weeks, or last 3 to 4 weeks rather. Typically when we see major exploits and kind of unwinding across the industry, it's like taking one step back to take 2 steps forward. I really do feel like these setbacks ultimately bring learned lessons that make our industry stronger. And so, yeah, curious to get your guys' takes on kind of like if you have any high-level learned takeaways from the events of the last, let's say, month, and if this translates to anything you would like to see convert into change looking forward.
So, I think we've pictured quite bleak. Picture of the DeFi space, especially after the Balancer Act. But if we look in terms of timeline, over the course of the year, there was not so many hacks compared to like 2 or 3 years ago, where you had like a major hack like every month. And I think the industry is getting better and better at securing smart contract, but also all the layers that are on top, which is great. And now we're focused on smart contract. Now you have also market risk, which is something that with the 10 crash recently, there's like market risk, but also all those options supply chain, and all those kind of layers are getting better and better. And I think we're heading toward I want to stay optimistic about that. We still have a lot of work to do on our side. For instance, at Morpho, it's more surfacing the information of what's happening at the vault level, at the market level, and pushing that to the interface and make it more digestible to the end user. That could be through risk rating that we've seen are not does not solve the problem entirely, but can be helpful still. That's the kind of thing that we need to improve. Others need to improve, but we're getting better, I guess.
I'll just give a macro answer. We're getting better year over year, clearly tell. This is a marathon as an industry. There's so much to win, like the whole RWA space. What's striking this year was the amount of narratives we had this year, starting with AI, agents, stablecoins, then RWAs, then perps, then prediction markets. Like all of that happened in 1 year, and everything was big. So I hope this calms down next year.
What's next?
And memes, don't forget the memes.
Oh, memes! I forgot about memes. Yeah. Right, meme one craze. But that was more December, so December last year. Anyways, just be on the right track.
Okay. Yeah. So I think safety is trending up and risk is trending down. So I think it is getting better year over year. I think a lot of that's due to a lot of the pragmatic things that we've really seen adoption with, whether that's real-time prevention and detection systems, or the adoption of insurance, or just moving more slowly. But I think the thing to not forget is to not get complacent. We're seeing privacy be really big. When privacy really starts to get into DeFi and things are really hard to track and things go wrong there, I think it's going to be a big mess like we haven't seen before. Luckily, everything else seems to be getting better, but I think we have work to do and we're not out of the woods yet.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic when it comes to risk management and security in the space. It's just improved so much. Just put yourself 3 years ago. Audit firms have become much more professional. There's so many more protections that exist. Everything's like, I just think that the security in the space has gotten a lot more professional, and there's a lot to be optimistic for. There is an arms race of builders have better security, attackers, malicious actors come up with better ways to hack things. And I think one thing that's been interesting to see has been the proliferation of offline hacks, like phishing attacks, and how large amount of funds are starting to now get stolen through those kinds of methods, which I think is also a testament to how on-chain protocols have actually gotten more hardened. So attackers are shifting to more novel ways of social engineering attacks. I'm super optimistic, and we keep getting better year over year, and we're way, way better than we were 3 years ago.
Absolutely, yeah, great points, and thank you guys all for joining on and sharing your insights. Really, really fun panel to, kind of summarize and close off the week here and look forward. So maybe a quick round of applause for our speakers today. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you all for joining in. Cheers, guys. Thank you.